Welcome back to Lina's Romantasy collection, where the kings are wild and the women don't take any crap. Quick check-in for the pack before we start the run. Where are you tuning in from right now? Put your location in the comments. Also, drop a wolf emoji if your pet is currently staring at you while you listen to these spicy chapters. Today, we have a total wreck of a story. It's gritty, it's fast, and it features a smuggler who's too stubborn to die and a Lycan King who thinks he's a space heater. But before the first bolt flies, if you want to support the collection and grab early access to stories just like this, hit that join button down below. It keeps our lights on and the stories coming your way. Now take a deep breath. The smuggler is armed, and the king is losing his cool. Let's read. Chapter 1. Bex hit the corner hard. Her scuffed combat boots slipped on the wet asphalt, but she found her balance and kept moving. She gripped the strap of the heavy canvas rucksack worn across her chest. The worn material of her faded leather jacket creaked with every frantic motion. She pushed a stubborn strand of short, chopped dark hair out of her eyes. A smudge of black grease stained her left jaw. She needed a place to hide. The rebel drop went sour and someone tipped off the pack guards. She ducked into a narrow gap between two dead apartment towers. Shadows swallowed the space. Dirty water dripped from rusted fire escapes overhead. She took 3 steps before a giant shape dropped from the metal stairs. The impact shattered the concrete below his boots. Beck stopped fast. He stood tall and broad, a wall of muscle and menace. A jagged scar cut thick across his neck. His eyes glowed a dangerous amber in the gloom. He wore a dark shirt beneath a black tactical vest. A deep chest pouch sat strapped near his collarbone. My luck is a bad joke, Bex thought, a feral king blocking the only exit. A battered titanium rank ring caught the dim light as Owen rolled his shoulders. He took a slow stride forward. The raw heat radiating from his skin met the cold night air, creating a faint mist around him. The scent of pine needles flooded the alley, clashing with Bex's own scent of rain on hot dust. Bex refused to back down. She reached into her canvas rucksack and pulled out her scavenged blaster. Silver-laced wiring wrapped tight around the scratched metal barrel. She aimed it right at the center of his chest. Owen did not stop. He kept walking until the weapon pressed hard against his tactical vest, digging deep into his ribs. The silver wire touched his bare skin through a tear in the dark fabric. A sharp hiss filled the silence. The stench of seared flesh followed. He took the burn without a flinch. She has steel in her spine, Owen noted to himself, but her hands tremble. Pull it, Owen growled, his voice a rough, deep rumble. Or I'm pulling you. He pushed his heavy vibe into the words, a true alpha command meant to drop a wolf straight to their knees. Bex rolled her eyes. To her human ears, the king sounded like a loud, arrogant dog barking for attention. Take one more step and I blast a hole through your ribs, Bex said. She tapped her thumb against her index finger. It was a habit she hated, a glaring tell whenever she bluffed. The blaster only had a single charge left in the energy cell. Before Owen called her bluff, a strange sound broke the tension. A soft, pathetic squeak echoed from the deep pouch on Owen's chest. A fat, gray, cross-eyed possum tumbled out of the tactical vest. It hit the wet pavement with a soft thud, rolled onto its back, and went stiff as a board. Its pink tongue lolled sideways out of its mouth. Bex stared at the rigid animal near the king's boots. She lowered the blaster a fraction of an inch. Is that a possum? Owen rubbed the bridge of his nose. A sharp headache built behind his eyes. This is Gus. He hates yelling. The big bad wolf carries a fainting trash rat, Bex thought, fighting a smirk. This night is pure chaos. Give him a minute, Owen muttered, looking down at his companion. Gus did not twitch. His body temperature dropped, a survival trick to mimic death. A red laser sight danced across the brick wall beside Bex's head. Snipers, Owen realized. His instincts flared hot and fast. Get down, he roared. The brick wall exploded in a shower of dust and stone as energy bolts ripped through the alley. Bex hit the ground, covering her head as jagged rocks rained down on her shoulders. Owen lunged forward, grabbing the stiff possum from the pavement and shoving the animal back into his chest pouch. "Move!" Owen shouted, grabbing the collar of Bex's jacket. He yanked her to her feet. Laser fire scorched the ground where she laid a second ago. They had no cover and no time. The alley turned into a death trap. Bex clutched her rucksack tight against her ribs. The payload inside meant everything. She ran into the dust cloud, the feral king matching her stride. Chapter 2. Energy bolts shattered the pavement behind them. Bex sprinted through the blinding dust, her boots kicking up loose gravel. The snipers tracked their movement from the rooftops. Searing red beams sliced through the dark air. Owen stayed close to her side. His sheer speed turned him into a blur, but he held back to match her human pace. The heat coming off his body felt like an open furnace. He shoved Bex behind a rusted dumpster just as a laser blast melted the metal rim off the trash bin. Slag dripped onto the concrete, glowing bright orange. "My ride is 2 streets over," Bex yelled over the noise. "Lead the way," Owen ordered. He scanned the rooftops, his amber eyes piercing through the thick smoke. Bex broke from cover. She dashed across the open intersection. A sniper took a shot. The blast hit the street inches from her boot, sending sharp shrapnel flying. A jagged piece of stone sliced a deep cut across her cheek. Warm blood trickled down her jaw, mixing with the grease smudge. She ignored the sting. They reached the hidden scrapyard. Tucked beneath a fallen billboard sat Bex's vehicle. It was a rigged-up iron-gray armored rover. The machine boasted a rusty grille and 4 thick, patched tires. It looked like junk, but the reinforced steel plating made it a tank. "Get in!" Bex shouted, pulling the heavy driver's side door open. The hinges shrieked. Owen ran around to the passenger side. He yanked the handle, but the metal jammed. Another laser blast hit the ground near his boots. With a frustrated growl, Owen ripped the door open with pure, feral strength. The locking mechanism snapped with a loud crack. The door swung wide, broken and useless. "I will make him pay for that," Bex thought, diving into the driver's seat. Owen folded his large frame into the passenger side. He slammed the broken door shut, but it bounced back open an inch. The busted lock refused to catch. Bex shoved the key into the ignition. She twisted it hard. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. "Come on," she whispered, twisting the key again. A loud click echoed through the cab. Nothing happened. The engine stalled completely. "Drive the machine," Owen snapped, holding the broken door shut with his left hand. "I am trying!" Bex hit the steering wheel with the palm of her hand. "The starter relay is jammed. The blast from the alley must have fried the circuit." A low hum echoed from the sky outside. The sound vibrated through the metal roof of the rover. Owen tilted his head, his sharp ears picking up the mechanical whine. The hum grew louder, turning into a high-pitched screech. "We have bigger problems," Owen said. His voice dropped an octave, the feral beast in his mind pacing near the surface. A searchlight cut through the darkness, sweeping over the scrapyard. It illuminated the rusty grille of the armored rover. "Thermal drone," Bex said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It tracks body heat. We are sitting ducks." "It tracks my heat," Owen corrected. His body temperature burned far higher than a human's. He was a beacon in the cold night. Gus the possum remained stiff in the chest pouch, completely hidden from the sensors due to his dropped body temperature. But Owen was a glowing target. "Fix the engine," Owen commanded. He let go of the broken door and kicked it wide open. "What are you doing?" Bex yelled. Owen stepped out of the rover, standing tall in the searchlight's glare. "Buying you time." Chapter 3. The thermal drone hovered 10 feet in the air, a sleek metal sphere lined with glowing blue sensors. It focused its lenses entirely on Owen. The machine deployed twin energy turrets from its sides. Bex did not waste a second watching the fight. She reached down into her right boot and pulled out her bypass wrench. The solid steel tool felt heavy and familiar in her grip. She jammed the flat end of the wrench into the gap of the steering column panel and pried it open. The plastic cover snapped off, exposing a nest of wires. Outside, the drone fired. Owen dodged the twin bolts with brutal speed. He lunged forward, jumping onto the hood of the armored rover. His combat boots dented the thick iron-gray metal. The drone adjusted its aim, tracking his furnace-like heat signature. "He is going to get himself killed," Bex thought, stripping the insulation off a red wire with her thumb. Owen roared. The sound tore through the quiet scrapyard, wild and untamed. He launched himself from the hood of the rover, flying through the air. He crashed into the hovering drone. The impact sent them both tumbling toward the dirt. Sparks showered the rover's dashboard as Bex touched the red wire to a raw copper node. The starter motor whined, fighting to turn over. "Catch the spark," Bex muttered, striking the wires together again. Outside, Owen wrestled the drone in the mud. The machine spun its turrets, trying to blast a hole through his chest. Owen grabbed the metal barrels with his bare hands. The raw heat of the energy cells scorched his palms, but he ignored the burn. With a violent twist, he ripped the turrets off the main chassis. He raised his fist and drove it straight through the drone's central sensor eye. The machine sparked, shuddered, and died. The rover's engine roared to life. Thick black exhaust shot out of the tailpipe. "Get in!" Bex screamed over the rumble. Owen tossed the broken drone aside. He jumped back into the passenger seat, pulling the broken door shut with him. He had to keep a tight grip on the interior handle to stop it from swinging open. Blood dripped from his scarred palms. The cuts already began to knit themselves together, his fast healing taking over. Bex slammed her foot on the gas pedal. The patched tires spun in the dirt, catching traction a second later. The iron-gray rover shot out of the scrapyard, smashing through a chain-link fence. They sped into the deserted streets of the dead zones. The cab fell silent, save for the roar of the engine and the rattle of the broken door. Bex kept her eyes on the road, weaving past burnt-out cars and deep craters. She tapped her thumb against her index finger on the steering wheel, her nerves humming with adrenaline. Owen leaned back against the seat. His chest heaved. The feral heat slowly faded from his eyes, leaving them a solid, piercing amber. He looked down at his chest pouch. Gus remained stiff, his pink tongue still hanging out. "He is fine," Owen grunted, answering Bex's unasked question. Owen shifted his gaze to the heavy canvas rucksack resting on Bex's lap. He pointed a bloody finger at the bag. "Pull over," Owen demanded. "I want to see the cargo." "No chance," Bex said, accelerating down the broken highway. "This payload is my business." "You dragged a rebel hit squad to my border," Owen fired back. "That makes it my business. Open the bag, human." Chapter 4. Bex gripped the steering wheel tight. The iron-gray rover rattled over a deep pothole, shaking the entire cab. The broken passenger door groaned against Owen's grip. "I said no," Bex answered, keeping her eyes fixed on the ruined road ahead. "This payload pays for my ticket out of this wasteland. It drains a year of wages from the buyer. I am not letting a feral king confiscate my retirement fund." Owen shifted in his seat. The cramped space of the rover brought them too close. He reached across the center console. His large hand clamped down on the canvas strap of the rucksack. "Hey!" Bex shouted, swatting at his arm. "I rule these streets," Owen stated, his voice a low threat. "I decide what passes through them. Let go of the bag." "You break my cargo, I shoot you with the silver again," Bex warned. She slammed the brakes. The rover screeched to a violent halt in the middle of the empty highway. The sudden stop threw them forward. Owen used the momentum to yank the rucksack out of Bex's grasp. He tossed the heavy bag onto his lap. "He is impossible," Bex thought, glaring at the stubborn alpha. Owen opened the canvas flap. Inside sat a sleek, locked metal case. It looked out of place in the dirty, ruined world. High-end tech. He pulled the case out and set it on the dashboard. "Hand me the code," Owen demanded. "I do not have the code," Bex spat. "Smugglers do not ask questions. We just transport the goods." Owen did not argue. He wrapped his hands around the edges of the metal case. His muscles bunched under his dark shirt. With a brutal surge of strength, he pried the lid upward. The metal groaned. The electronic lock sparked and shattered. The latch broke in half, destroyed beyond repair. "You savage!" Bex groaned. "You just tanked the value of the goods." Owen lifted the broken lid. A cold white mist curled out of the box, spilling onto the dashboard. Inside the padded foam sat 4 glass canisters. The liquid inside glowed a sickly, vibrant purple. Owen stopped breathing. The amber light in his eyes flared bright with pure, untamed rage. He slammed the broken lid shut with his fist, sealing the mist inside. "What is your problem?" Bex asked, leaning away from his sudden anger. "Do you know what this is?" Owen asked. His voice shook with a lethal fury. Bex stared at the broken case. The purple hue burned in her memory. She knew the lore of this world. She knew the poison that haunted the Packlands. "Wolfsbane," Bex whispered. The blood drained from her face. "Aerosol wolfsbane," Owen corrected. "Weaponized gas. If one of those glass canisters shatters inside my territory, the wind will carry the vapor for miles. It will choke every man, woman, and child in my pack." Bex stared at her hands. She tapped her thumb against her index finger, but this time it was not a lie. It was pure shock. "The rebels set me up," Bex realized. "A kick to the teeth. They hired a human to bypass the pack border guards, turning me into a walking bomb." "I did not know," Bex said, her voice steadying. She looked Owen straight in the glowing eyes. "I smuggle tech, rations, wires. I do not transport mass murder." Owen studied her face. He smelled the air in the tight cab. He searched for the bitter ash scent of a lie, but he found nothing. She spoke the truth. "The rebels played you," Owen said. He looked at the broken case. "I am destroying this poison right now." "No!" Bex grabbed the case. "We use it as leverage. The rebels owe me credits, and they want this gas. We trap them." Chapter 5. Bex kept one hand on the steering wheel and shoved the broken metal case across the dashboard, away from the Lycan King. The purple glow from the glass canisters painted the interior of the cab in a sick neon light. The destroyed lock rattled against the metal frame with every bump in the ruined road. Owen kept his right hand clamped around the broken passenger door. His left hand reached for the box again. The silver burn on his chest throbbed beneath his dark shirt, a constant sting that fueled his foul mood. "I am crushing those vials right now," Owen ordered, his voice an unbroken growl. "I will not let weaponized gas sit in this vehicle. One hard turn, the glass shatters, and we both suffocate." "Touch my cargo and I crash us into a concrete pillar," Bex fired back. She meant it. She kept her foot pressed hard against the accelerator. "I need those credits," Bex thought, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "That poison is my only ticket to the walled colonies. I refuse to die in the dirt." "You speak of leverage," Owen said, leaning closer to her. The raw heat radiating from his skin filled the cramped space. "You negotiate with a loaded weapon pointed at your own throat. The rebels hired you as a suicide courier. They want you dead." "They owe me a brutal expense for this run," Bex argued, swerving around a burnt-out transport truck. "Enough credits to buy a permanent colony visa. They want this gas back? They pay my fee. Then you can have them. We set a trap." Owen stared at the stubborn human. Her cheek bore a fresh, bleeding cut from the alleyway shrapnel. She looked like a bruised street brawler, yet she tried to out-bargain an alpha. The audacity sparked a twisted sense of respect in his chest. His scorched palms, still knitting together from the drone fight, curled into fists. "A trap requires a location and bait," Owen countered. "You are driving blind into the dead zones." Before Bex formulated a comeback, a row of glaring floodlights snapped on half a mile down the highway. Bex squinted against the blinding white glare. She eased her foot off the gas pedal. The rover's engine knocked, the exposed wires beneath the steering column throwing a stray spark onto her boot. A barricade of spiked iron barricades blocked all 4 lanes of the road. Armed men in tactical gear stood behind the metal spikes, raising heavy pulse rifles toward the approaching vehicle. Red laser sights danced across the dented hood of the rover. "Rebel roadblock," Bex confirmed, her stomach dropping. "They tracked the cargo," Owen stated. He tightened his grip on the broken passenger door. His amber eyes narrowed at the armed men. "Break the machine. We fight them on the asphalt." "No," Bex decided. Her hands moved fast. She shifted the rover into top gear. "We have reinforced steel plating. We ram it." She possesses 0 survival instincts, Owen realized, bracing his boots against the floorboard. "Hold on to the door," Bex shouted. She slammed the accelerator to the floor. The heavy engine roared, burning raw fuel. The rover surged forward, gaining momentum like a runaway freight train. The rebels behind the barricade opened fire. Energy bolts rained down on the vehicle, scorching the iron-gray paint and cracking the reinforced windshield. Spiderwebs of fractured glass obscured Bex's vision. She did not flinch. She aimed the heavy grill dead center at the weakest point of the spiked iron fence. The impact sounded like a detonated bomb. Metal shrieked and tore. The heavy rover smashed through the barricade, launching the iron spikes into the air. One jagged piece of shrapnel ripped underneath the chassis, slicing straight through the radiator hose. Rebels dove out of the way to avoid the crushing tires. Bex kept the wheels straight, plowing through the debris. They burst out the other side of the floodlights, tearing back into the darkness of the dead zones. "We cleared it!" Bex yelled, a rush of adrenaline wiping away her fear. A loud, violent hiss answered her triumph. Thick white steam billowed out from under the dented hood, covering the cracked windshield. The engine let out a pathetic, grinding groan. The temperature gauge on the dashboard spiked into the red zone. Owen glared at her through the smoke. "Your steel plating just cost us our escape." Chapter 6. The rover lost speed in seconds. Without the radiator, the engine block devoured itself. Metal ground against metal with a sickening crunch. Smoke poured through the air vents, choking the cramped cab. Bex hit the brakes before the friction sparked a fire, wrestling the heavy steering wheel to guide the dying machine toward the shoulder of the ruined highway. They coasted to a halt beneath the skeletal remains of an old overpass. The engine gave one final shudder and died. Total silence rushed back into the wasteland, broken only by the hiss of boiling coolant hitting the cracked pavement. Bex sat frozen in the driver's seat. She stared through the spider-webbed glass. "My ticket out just turned into a rusted coffin," Bex thought. A bitter knot formed in her throat. Owen pushed the broken passenger door open. He stepped out into the freezing night air, scanning the perimeter. The dead zones offered no comfort. Broken skyscrapers loomed in the distance like rotting teeth. The wind howled through the concrete pillars, carrying the stench of rust and decay. He reached back into the cab and grabbed the broken metal case from the dashboard. He tucked the Wolfsbane cargo securely under his left arm. "Grab your bag," Owen commanded. "The rebel patrol will follow our smoke trail. We need shelter." Bex swallowed her frustration. She bent down, grabbed the bypass wrench from the floorboard, and slid it back into her right boot. She pulled the strap of her bag over her chest, ensuring the scavenged blaster rested near the top flap for easy access. She kicked her door open and stepped onto the ruined highway. The temperature drop hit her like a physical blow. The dead zones dropped below freezing after midnight. She zipped her faded leather jacket up to her chin, but the thin material offered zero protection against the biting wind. Owen marched forward, his boots crunching over shattered glass and broken asphalt. Bex hurried to match his long strides. They walked for an hour in tense silence. The shadows grew deeper as they left the highway and entered a maze of collapsed commercial buildings. Bex's teeth began to chatter. Her hands went numb inside her pockets. The shrapnel cut on her cheek hardened into a stiff scab, pulling her skin tight. Owen paused near the entrance of a ruined bank. The reinforced concrete walls remained standing, offering a solid barrier against the wind. The heavy vault doors in the back sat blown wide open from a raid decades ago, creating a deep, windowless cave inside the structure. "In here," Owen gestured, stepping over a pile of rubble. Bex followed him into the dark. The interior smelled of ancient dust and damp stone. It provided cover from the elements, but the cold lingered, trapped inside the thick walls. Owen set the broken case on a cracked marble teller counter. He walked to the entrance, his sharp eyes piercing the gloom to ensure no one tracked them. Satisfied, he turned back to the human. Bex sat on the stone floor, her knees pulled tight to her chest. She wrapped her arms around her shins, trying to preserve her core temperature. Violent shivers racked her frame. "We need a fire," Bex forced the words through her chattering teeth. "No," Owen denied the request, taking a seat on the ground a few feet away. "A fire paints a target on our backs. Thermal drones see the heat from miles away. Snipers track the smoke." "I will freeze," Bex stated, a harsh truth rather than a complaint. Owen watched her. The feral beast pacing in his mind hated seeing a vulnerable creature suffer. His own body felt like an open furnace, burning calories at a massive rate to fuel his fast healing and maintain his high temperature. The cold air brushing against his skin felt like a cool breeze, nothing more. Her stubborn pride will let her turn to ice before she begs for help, Owen realized. A soft rustling sound broke the quiet. The deep pouch on Owen's chest moved. A gray nose poked out of the dark fabric. Gus blinked his cross-eyed gaze at the ruined bank, yawned wide, and climbed out of the tactical vest. The possum waddled over to Bex, sniffing her freezing boots. "Even the rat knows you need heat," Owen muttered. Chapter 7. Gus climbed into Bex's lap, curling his fat gray body into a tight ball. The possum radiated a small, pathetic amount of warmth. Bex placed her numb hands over his fur, grateful for the living hot water bottle, but it was not enough. Her joints ached, her breathing grew shallow. Owen sat across from her in the dark vault. He felt the cold seeping into her bones. The space between them felt loaded, heavy with the unspoken tension of their clashing worlds. He was a king of apex predators. She was a defiant scavenger. They had zero business sharing a survival camp in the ruins. He let out a rough sigh, giving in to his protective instincts. Owen stood up and crossed the stone floor. He sat down right beside Bex, his broad shoulder pressing against hers. The heat rolling off his skin hit her freezing body like a blast from an open oven door. Bex stiffened. Her survival instincts screamed at her to pull away from the dangerous alpha, but the glorious warmth anchored her in place. "Lean in," Owen ordered, his voice lacking the usual harsh bite. Bex did not argue. She shifted her weight, pressing her side flush against his chest and arm. Owen wrapped his heavy arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his ribs. The tactical vest provided a thick barrier, but his raw body heat cut straight through the Kevlar and leather. "He burns like a star," Bex thought, closing her eyes as the agonizing shivers finally began to subside. "Better?" Owen asked, looking down at the top of her chopped dark hair. "Passable," Bex lied, the warmth melting the ice in her veins. She rested her head against his shoulder. "You make a decent space heater, for a savage." Owen let out a low, rumbling chuckle. The sound vibrated through his chest, rumbling against Bex's side. Gus adjusted his position on Bex's lap, letting out a satisfied squeak at the new heat source. "The beast requires fuel to burn this hot," Owen explained, his amber eyes scanning the dark entrance of the bank. "We run through calories fast. Our bodies heal damage and fight the cold by burning energy. I will need to hunt soon." "Not tonight," Bex murmured, the exhaustion of the day crashing down on her. The adrenaline left her system, leaving behind a heavy fatigue. "No, not tonight," Owen agreed. He tightened his hold on her, ensuring no freezing air slipped between them. The chemistry between them shifted in the dark. The sharp banter faded, replaced by a quiet, electric awareness. Bex felt the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat against her side. She realized how easy it would be to trust him, to let the feral king fight her battles. She shoved the thought away, clinging to her independence. Owen felt the soft rise and fall of her breathing. He felt the steady rhythm of her pulse. His inner wolf, usually restless and violent, settled into a calm state with the human tucked under his arm. He possessed a desperate need to protect his pack, and tonight, his instincts expanded that circle to include the sharp-tongued smuggler. Hours passed. The wind howled outside the ruined bank, but inside their dark corner, the temperature felt perfect. Bex drifted into a light sleep, her fingers tangled in the possum's gray fur. Owen stayed awake. His super senses tracked every sound in the dead zones. He heard the scrape of debris shifting a mile away. He heard the whistle of the wind through the steel beams. Then he heard the scratching. It started low, a scraping of claws against concrete just outside the bank entrance. Owen's muscles locked. His amber eyes flared bright in the shadows. He listened closer. He picked up the sound of ragged, wet breathing, multiple sets of lungs. He heard the scraping of bone against stone. Rogues, Owen realized. Mutant wolves starved into madness. He shifted his arm, gently waking Bex. "Do not speak," he breathed into her ear. "We have company." Chapter 8. Bex woke instantly. She read the lethal focus in Owen's glowing eyes and reached into her bag without making a sound. Her fingers wrapped around the grip of the blaster. She slid her thumb over the safety catch, ready to fire her final charge. Gus sensed the shift in the air. The possum let out a panicked squeak, rolled off Bex's lap, and went completely rigid on the stone floor, playing dead before the fight even started. "Stay behind me," Owen commanded, rising to his feet in a fluid, silent motion. 3 massive shadows slinked through the bank entrance. The mutant wolves stood on 2 legs, hunched and deformed by radiation and starvation. Their fur fell out in mangy patches, revealing scarred, gray skin. Red, crazed eyes locked onto the heat signatures inside the vault. Drool dripped from their elongated fangs, hitting the cracked marble floor with wet splatters. The mutants did not care about the Wolfsbane case on the counter. They wanted meat. The largest rogue lunged forward, clearing the distance in a single, desperate leap. Its jaws snapped toward Owen's throat. Owen met the attack head-on. He did not bother reaching for a weapon. He let his feral instincts snap the leash. The shift hit him fast. He ripped the heavy Kevlar vest over his head, tossing the armor and the sleeping possum onto the teller counter before the change took him. The sound of breaking bones echoed through the ruined bank. Owen's spine lengthened and snapped into a new shape. Muscle mass expanded, tearing the seams of his shirt to shreds. Sharp, deadly claws erupted from his fingertips. His face elongated, his jaw unhinging to make room for rows of razor-sharp teeth. He embraced the agonizing pain of the transformation, turning the sting into pure, unadulterated rage. In seconds, the Lycan King stood in his true form, a towering, untamed beast of muscle and dark fur. He caught the leaping mutant mid-air. Owen's massive claws sank deep into the rogue's chest. He slammed the creature into the concrete wall with enough force to crack the foundation. The mutant whined, struggling to bite, but Owen crushed its windpipe with a brutal squeeze. He tossed the lifeless body aside like a broken toy. The other 2 mutants hesitated, their starved brains registering the overwhelming alpha power rolling off Owen. Bex stood frozen behind the marble counter, her blaster aimed but useless in the chaos. "He is a nightmare given flesh," Bex thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. "And he is standing between me and death." The remaining rogues attacked together. One went high, aiming for Owen's face. The other went low, snapping at his legs. Owen roared, a sound that shook the dust from the ceiling. He swatted the high attacker out of the air with a backhand strike, his claws leaving deep trenches across the mutant's face. He dropped his weight, spinning on his heel to catch the lower attacker by the scruff of its neck. With raw, terrifying strength, he hoisted the screaming creature off the ground and drove it spine first across his raised knee. The bones snapped with a sickening crack. The final mutant scrambled backward, slipping on the bloody marble floor. It turned to run back into the wasteland. Owen dropped to all fours. He launched himself across the room, an apex predator taking down prey. He hit the fleeing rogue right at the entrance, his jaws clamping down hard on the back of its neck. A single, violent shake ended the fight. The ruined bank fell dead silent. The metallic smell of blood filled the air. Owen stood over the carnage. His chest heaved, pulling in jagged breaths. The feral beast possessed total control of his mind. The violence of the kill sent his adrenaline spiking. He turned his massive, owlish head toward the back of the vault. His glowing amber eyes locked onto Bex. He took a slow, stalking step toward her. The feral king forgot his human side. Bex raised the blaster, aiming it right between his glowing eyes. Her hands shook. She had one shot. She did not want to take it. "Owen!" Bex called out, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Stand down!" The massive wolf bared his teeth, a low, threatening rumble vibrating in his chest. He took another step closer. Chapter 9. The towering beast took a heavy step forward. Claws clicked against the cracked marble floor. The Lycan King looked nothing like a man. He stood on 4 legs, a giant predator forged from dark fur and raw muscle. The feral beast held total control. Glowing amber eyes locked onto Bex. Bex kept the scavenged blaster raised. Her arms shook under the strain. The silver-laced wiring wrapped around the barrel caught the dim light. She had one single charge left in the energy cell. Aiming right between his eyes guaranteed a kill. "I refuse to die in this ruined bank," Bex thought, gripping the weapon tighter. "But I will not shoot my only ticket out of the dead zones." The giant wolf bared its teeth. A low rumble vibrated in its chest, a sound that shook the dust from the ceiling. The heat rolling off the animal hit Bex like an open oven door. "Owen," Bex said. She kept her voice flat and hard. "You took out the rogues. The fight is over. Back down." The wolf snapped its jaws. It did not understand the human words. It only understood threats and prey. It took another stalking step. Before the beast pounced, a gray shape stirred on the stone floor. Gus the possum shook off his survival feint. He rolled onto his belly and blinked his cross-eyed gaze. He let out a loud yawn and sat up. The possum turned his head and saw the giant, blood-soaked wolf looming over the area. Gus let out a sharp, terrified squeak. He tipped backward, hit the stone floor, and went rigid as a plank. His pink tongue lolled sideways out of his mouth. The ridiculous sight broke the tension. The feral wolf stopped in its tracks. It tilted its large head, staring at the stiff trash rat. Confusion pierced the feral rage. The sheer absurdity of the fainting animal acted like an anchor. It dragged Owen's human mind back to the surface. The amber light in his eyes flickered. The wolf let out a pained whine. The shift began. Bex lowered the blaster a fraction of an inch, watching the agonizing process. Bones cracked and popped loud like gunshots. The giant wolf collapsed onto the floor. Fur receded into skin. The elongated spine snapped back into a human shape. Muscle mass compressed. The sound of tearing tissue echoed through the dark vault. Owen hit the floor on his hands and knees, gasping for air. The transformation took a brutal toll. Sweat dripped from his forehead. The shredded remnants of his shirt hung from his shoulders. The raw silver burn on his chest flared bright red against his skin. He stayed on the floor for a long minute, pulling oxygen into his lungs. The beast paced in the back of his mind, angry but contained. "Welcome back," Bex said. She clicked the safety on her blaster and slid the weapon into her bag. Owen did not answer right away. He reached across the cracked marble and grabbed his discarded tactical vest. He pulled the heavy Kevlar over his head, wincing as the rough fabric dragged across the silver burn. He strapped it tight across his ribs. He stood up, towering over the human. He scooped the stiff possum off the teller counter and shoved Gus back into the chest pouch. "We need to leave," Owen ordered, his voice rough as gravel. "The blood will draw more rogues." "My ride is dead," Bex reminded him. She pointed toward the entrance of the ruined bank. "The radiator is shot." "Then you fix the machine," Owen countered. He walked over to the teller counter and picked up the broken metal case. The destroyed lock rattled as he tucked the Wolfsbane cargo under his arm. "Get your tools. We march back to the highway." Bex rolled her eyes, but she reached down and tapped the side of her right boot to ensure the bypass wrench sat secure. She followed the feral king out into the freezing night. Chapter 10. The trek back to the ruined highway drained Bex. The dead zones offered zero shelter from the biting wind. Her teeth chattered. Her hands lost all feeling. The stiff scab on her cheek pulled her skin tight with every step. Owen led the way. The raw heat radiating from his body kept the worst of the cold at bay, but Bex kept her distance. The memory of the giant wolf tearing the mutants apart stayed fresh in her mind. They reached the spiked iron barricade an hour later. The area sat deserted. The rebel soldiers abandoned the post after the heavy rover smashed through their defenses. A destroyed rebel transport truck laid on its side near the broken floodlights, a victim of the collision. "Wait here," Bex told Owen. She jogged over to the overturned truck. She dropped to her knees on the frozen asphalt and pulled the solid steel bypass wrench from her boot. She jammed the flat end of the tool under the transport's hood latch and pried it open. The metal groaned and gave way. Bex dug through the engine block. She found a thick, reinforced coolant tube. It remained intact. She used the sharp edge of the wrench to cut the clamps, ripping the rubber hose free from the dead engine. "Got it," Bex said, holding the tube in the air. They walked another mile down the dark road until they reached the overpass. The armored rover sat in the shadows, cold and dead. The passenger door remained busted, hanging open a few inches. Bex popped the dented hood. She leaned over the engine block. The heat from the metal vanished hours ago. She worked in the dark, using her cold fingers to strip the broken radiator hose. Owen stood guard near the rear bumper. He watched the perimeter, his amber eyes scanning the empty wasteland. The broken case rested near his combat boots. "She knows machines better than people," Owen noted to himself. "She dives into the grease without a second thought." "Hand me the wire tape from my bag," Bex called out from under the hood. Owen reached into the heavy canvas bag resting on the driver's seat. He tossed her a roll of black tape. Bex caught it with one hand. She spliced the salvaged coolant tube into the system, wrapping the connections tight. She twisted the raw wires beneath the snapped steering column panel to prime the starter motor. "Done," Bex announced, slamming the dented hood shut. She wiped a fresh streak of black grease across her forehead. She climbed into the driver's seat. Owen grabbed the broken case and folded his large frame into the passenger side. He pulled the broken door shut, his hand gripping the interior handle to hold the useless lock in place. Bex grabbed the exposed ignition wires and struck them together. The engine whined, coughed, and roared to life. The heavy machine vibrated around them. Heat blasted from the air vents, filling the cramped cab. Bex let out a breath she did not know she held. A small smirk broke across her face. "Never doubt a scavenger." "Drive," Owen commanded, his tone lacking any humor. "The pack border sits 5 miles east." Bex slammed her foot on the gas pedal. The patched tires grabbed the broken asphalt. The rover shot out from under the overpass, leaving the dead zones behind. The heater blew warm air over her numb fingers, returning the feeling to her joints. Gus poked his gray nose out of the chest pouch. The possum let out a happy squeak at the rising temperature inside the cab. "We need a plan," Bex said, steering around a massive crater in the road. "Your people hate humans. If I roll up to the gate with a box of poison, they will shoot me on sight." "They answer to me," Owen stated, his voice a deep rumble. "You are under my protection." "That sounds like a terrible guarantee," Bex muttered. Chapter 11. The landscape shifted as the rover burned fuel. The ruined skyscrapers of the dead zones gave way to fortified concrete walls. Thick steel wire topped the barriers. Watchtowers stood at every corner, sweeping the terrain with heavy spotlights. Bex approached the main gate. A barricade of solid steel beams blocked the road. 4 pack guards stepped out from the shadows. They wore heavy combat gear and carried high-powered pulse rifles. They raised their weapons, aiming the red laser sights right at the rover's cracked windshield. Bex hit the brakes. The machine screeched to a halt in the dirt. "Do not reach for the blaster," Owen warned, his grip tightening on the broken passenger door. The lead guard approached the driver's side. He kept his rifle raised. His eyes glowed a faint yellow in the dark. He glared at Bex through the spider-webbed glass, his face twisting with clear disgust. "Human," the guard barked. "Kill the engine and step out of the vehicle. You trespass on pack lands." Bex gripped the steering wheel. She hated taking orders from anyone, especially arrogant wolves with loaded guns. She tapped her fingers against the leather rim, a restless energy building in her veins. "I am not getting out," Bex shot back, raising her voice over the engine noise. The guard leveled his rifle right at her head. "Step out, or I blast a hole through the door." Owen shoved the broken passenger door wide open. He stepped out of the rover, his combat boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. He stood tall in the headlights. The shredded remnants of his shirt and the blood staining his hands painted a picture of pure violence. The thick titanium rank ring caught the glare of the spotlights. The 4 guards froze. The lead guard lowered his pulse rifle, his yellow eyes widening in shock. "Alpha," the guard breathed, taking a step back. Owen did not offer a greeting. He pushed his heavy vibe into the air. The commanding presence rolled off him in waves. "Drop your weapons," Owen growled. He pushed the true Alpha command into his words. The power hit the guards like a physical blow. Their knees buckled. All 4 men hit the dirt at the exact same time. Their pulse rifles clattered to the ground. They bowed their heads, exposing their necks in total submission to their king. Bex watched the display from the driver's seat. She rolled her eyes. To her human ears, the command held zero magic. He just sounded like a bossy jerk shouting in the dark. He loves the dramatic entrance, Bex thought. "Open the gate," Owen ordered the kneeling men, "and notify the beta. I bring cargo for the vault." The lead guard scrambled to his feet, keeping his eyes glued to the dirt. He ran to the control panel and slammed his fist onto a heavy button. The steel beams groaned and pulled apart, clearing the road. Owen climbed back into the passenger seat. He pulled the broken door shut and locked his grip on the handle. "Drive the machine," Owen told Bex. Bex hit the gas pedal. They rolled past the bowing guards and entered the pack territory. The interior of the walled city looked different from the dead zones. Lights burned in the windows of clean, sturdy buildings. People walked the streets. "You really enjoy the whole groveling routine," Bex said, keeping her eyes on the road. "Do they practice falling down, or does it come natural?" Owen glared at her. The Alpha command demanded absolute respect, but the human treated him like an annoying passenger. It sparked a fresh headache right behind his eyes. "Take the next right." Owen ignored her comment. "The safe house sits at the end of the block. Keep the bag close." Chapter 12. Bex parked the heavy rover in an underground concrete garage. The engines sputtered and died, plunging the cab into total silence. The adrenaline of the long night crashed down on her shoulders. Owen grabbed the broken metal case from the dashboard. He kicked his door open and stepped out. Bex grabbed her bag and slid the bypass wrench from her boot, holding the tool in her hand just in case. They walked up a flight of steel stairs. The safe house looked like a brutalist fortress. Bare concrete walls, heavy iron doors, and 0 windows. It offered perfect security and 0 comfort. Owen led her down a long hallway. He stopped at a thick vault door. He punched a code into a keypad and grabbed the heavy wheel handle. He pulled it open. "Inside," Owen said. Beck stepped into the room. A single bulb cast a harsh light over a metal table and 2 steel chairs. A secondary wall safe sat built into the far corner. Owen walked straight to the wall safe. He spun the combination dial, opened the thick metal hatch, and placed the broken case inside. He slammed the door shut and spun the dial again, locking the 4 glass canisters of purple wolfsbane gas away. He leaned against the wall, letting out a rough breath. The feral heat still radiated from his skin, warming the freezing room. Bex dropped her bag onto the metal table. She sat down in one of the steel chairs. Her combat boots felt like lead weights. She unzipped her jacket and pulled the scavenged blaster from the top flap of the bag. A quiet, heavy tension filled the room. The chaos of the dead zones stayed outside the thick walls. In the small vault, the clash of their worlds vanished. It left only the gritty reality of survival. Bex grabbed a rag from her bag. She wiped the dust and dirt off the silver-laced wiring of her blaster. She checked the energy cell, confirming the single charge remained intact. Across the room, Owen walked to a small sink in the corner. He turned the rusted tap. Cold water poured out. He washed the dried mutant blood off his hands. The cuts on his palms from the drone fight showed fresh pink skin, the fast healing doing its job. He scrubbed the dirt from his titanium rank ring. He turned off the tap and grabbed a towel. He looked at the human sitting at the table. Her chopped dark hair stuck out in messy angles. The grease smudge on her jaw mixed with the dirt from the road. The stiff scab on her cheek looked painful. She looked like a disaster, yet her hands moved with steady, mechanical precision as she cleaned her weapon. Bex felt his gaze. She looked up from the blaster. The chemistry spiked hard in the quiet room. He stood towering and dangerous, his shredded shirt clinging to his shoulders. The silver burn on his chest served as a harsh reminder of their first meeting. "We need a deal." Bex broke the silence. Her voice sounded rough in the small space. "I brought the poison to your door. I fixed the ride. I earned my fee." "The rebels owe your fee," Owen countered. He tossed the towel onto the counter and walked over to the metal table. He sat down in the chair across from her. "I owe you nothing." "You owe me for the door you broke," Bex fired back. Owen let out a low chuckle. He rested his arms on the table. Gus peeked out of the chest pouch, his cross-eyed gaze looking between the 2 stubborn fighters. "We set the trap tomorrow," Owen stated. "We leak a message to the rebels. We tell them the human smuggler wants to trade the gas for the credits." "And when they show up?" Bex asked, setting the blaster on the table. "I tear them apart," Owen answered. His amber eyes flared bright. "And you get your ticket out." Chapter 13. The heavy iron door of the safe house groaned on its hinges. A new wolf stepped into the stark room. He carried a pulse rifle strapped across his back. His eyes flashed a bright, piercing yellow before settling into a dull brown. He took one look at the scene, the bloody Lycan King, the human sitting at the metal table, the stiffness in the room, and his face twisted in clear disgust. "Wyatt," Owen grunted, acknowledging his second-in-command. Wyatt ignored the greeting. He marched toward the table, his boots echoing against the bare concrete. He stopped 2 feet from Bex. He studied the stiff scab on her cheek, her dirty face, and the blaster resting near her fingertips. "You bring a scavenger into the inner walls," Wyatt stated, his tone dripping with venom. "The border guards reported a broken rover and a human driver. I assumed they made a mistake. I see they lacked the courage to shoot an intruder." "Watch your tone," Owen warned. Wyatt turned his focus to his king. "The perimeter is on edge. Rebel forces gather 2 miles east of the gate. We track their movements. They bring heavy artillery, Owen, pulse cannons, energy shields, and you harbor the exact rat they want." "The human stays," Owen said. He pushed off the wall. The Kevlar tactical vest creaked over his shredded shirt. The silver burn on his chest sent a spike of pain through his ribs, but he ignored the sting. She transported cargo. The rebels set a trap. Then throw her back into the wasteland, Wyatt argued, stepping closer to the Alpha. Let them tear her apart. It keeps the fight away from our doors. We do not risk pack lives for a street runner. Bex picked up her weapon from the table. She checked the grip, avoiding eye contact with the angry Beta. They talk about me like a piece of broken furniture, she thought. Just another problem to toss out with the trash. I decide who merits protection. Owen's voice dropped an octave. The feral beast paced just behind his eyes, agitated by the insubordination. She earned her place inside these walls tonight. She is a liability, Wyatt snapped, his temper flaring. Every second she breathes our air, the target on our backs grows larger. I want her gone, now. Owen did not yell. He did not raise his hands. He simply let the heavy vibe of his power crash down on the room. The Alpha command hit Wyatt like a punch to the gut. The Beta's knees hit the concrete floor with a harsh crack. His chin dropped to his chest. He fought the submission, his muscles shaking under the strain, but the ancient pack laws offered zero room for defiance. He remained pinned to the ground. She is under my protection, Owen declared. You question my judgment again, and I strip you of your rank. Do you understand? Yes, Alpha. Wyatt forced the words through clenched teeth. Owen pulled his power back. The crushing weight lifted from the room. Wyatt scrambled to his feet. He shot Bex a final, venomous glare before turning his back on them both. He marched out of the vault, slamming the iron door shut behind him. Bex let out a long breath. She rested her elbows on the metal table. Your right-hand man possesses a delightful personality. He protects the pack, Owen defended the Beta. He views you as a threat to our survival. He is not wrong. I feel so welcomed, Bex muttered. She slid the weapon into the bag. If the rebel army sits 2 miles out, your trap needs to happen fast. We trade the poison for the credits, and I vanish. Wyatt gets his wish. Owen crossed his arms. Gus poked his gray head out of the chest pouch, his pink nose twitching at the lingering tension in the room. The possum let out a soft squeak and retreated deep into the dark fabric. We dictate the terms, Owen said. We send a runner to the rebel camp. We offer the trade at the old rail yard, neutral ground. When they arrive, my enforcers flank them. And the credits? Bex pressed. You get your visa money, Owen assured her. I give you my word. Bex studied his face. The Lycan King looked exhausted, battered, and dangerous. Yet his promise held weight. She found zero deception in his amber eyes. Fine, Bex agreed. We do it your way. Chapter 14. Bex closed her eyes, seeking a brief moment of rest in the harsh light of the safe house. The hard steel chair offered zero comfort. Her joints ached from the freezing wasteland trek. The adrenaline crash left her drained, her mind foggy and slow. Owen paced the length of the vault. His combat boots scuffed the concrete. The constant movement betrayed the feral energy humming beneath his skin. He needed a fight to burn off the restless heat. Sit down, Bex suggested, her voice heavy with fatigue. You wear a trench in the floor. The enemy gathers, Owen replied, ignoring the advice. He stopped near the wall safe. The combination lock secured the deadly Wolfsbane cargo. I feel them pressing against the borders. The air feels charged. He acts like a caged animal, Bex thought. The king needs a courtyard to roam. Before Bex formulated another sarcastic remark, the ground lurched beneath her boots. The impact hit with the force of an earthquake. The blast rattled her teeth. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling swung in chaotic arcs, casting erratic shadows across the bare walls. A deafening boom echoed through the underground garage, shaking the foundation of the brutalist fortress. Bex jumped out of her chair. She grabbed her bag from the table, her fingers wrapping around the strap by instinct. What was that? Bex shouted over the ringing in her ears. Pulse cannon, Owen snarled. He reached for the heavy wheel handle of the iron door. A second explosion ripped through the air. This one struck closer. The concrete ceiling cracked. A thick cloud of gray dust rained down on them, coating the metal table and the floor in a fine powder. The overhead bulbs sparked, flickered, and died, plunging the vault into total darkness. Emergency red lights flared to life in the hallway outside. A dull, crimson glow filtered through the cracks around the heavy iron door. Owen yanked the wheel handle. The door swung open. The blare of emergency sirens assaulted their ears. The sound pierced the air, a relentless, high-pitched scream that signaled a total breach of the pack defenses. Wyatt's voice crackled through a small radio clipped to Owen's tactical vest. The audio broke through the static, chaotic, and rushed. "Alpha!" Wyatt yelled. Gunfire echoed in the background of the transmission. They bypassed the eastern gate. A strike team used a thermal charge on the perimeter wall. They are inside the city. Owen pressed the transmission button on his collar. "Hold the line. Push them back to the rubble." "They ignore the defenders!" Wyatt shouted back. "They push straight for the safe house. They want the gas." Owen released the button. His amber eyes glowed in the dim red light. The feral beast clawed at his mind, demanding violence. The enemy dared to bring a war to his doorstep. Bex pulled the blaster from her bag. The single charge remained ready. She stood beside the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. The safe house offered security, but it also functioned as a perfect tomb. "We need to move the cargo," Bex stated, pointing toward the wall safe. "If they breach this room, they take the poison." "The vault holds firm," Owen disagreed. "The combination lock requires my sequence. They lack the tools to break reinforced steel before my enforcers tear them apart." A third explosion hit the upper levels of the building. The sound of crumbling stone and shattering glass confirmed the breach. The rebels reached the fortress. The fight invaded their sanctuary. "They possess pulse cannons," Bex argued, her voice tight with panic. "They do not need a combination code. They will melt the entire wall." Owen knew she spoke the truth. He spun the dial on the wall safe, inputting the sequence with fast precision. The thick metal hatch clicked open. He grabbed the broken case from the shelf. The destroyed latch refused to stay shut, revealing a sliver of the sickly purple glow from the glass vials. "Take the possum," Owen ordered, reaching into his chest pouch. He pulled Gus out. The gray animal blinked, letting out a confused squeak at the blaring sirens. Owen shoved the possum into Bex's hands. She fumbled with the heavy bag and her weapon, pressing the fat creature against her jacket to keep him from dropping. "Keep him alive," Owen instructed, trying toward the open doorway. "I go to the front lines." Chapter 15. Bex clutched the gray possum against her chest. Gus burrowed his cold nose into the collar of her jacket, shivering from the noise of the blaring sirens. The red emergency lights bathed the stark concrete hallway in a bloody hue. Owen stood in the doorway, a towering wall of muscle blocking the exit. He gripped the broken metal case under his left arm. The feral heat rolled off him, pushing against the chill of the underground bunker. "You stay in this room." Owen delivered the command with zero room for debate. "You lock the heavy iron door from the inside. You do not open it for anyone except me." "You plan to fight an entire strike team with a broken box of poison under your arm?" Bex challenged. Her grip tightened on the blaster in her right hand. "You need a gun. You need cover fire." "I need you out of my way," Owen fired back. His amber eyes flared bright, the beast pacing close to the surface. "Humans die fast in a pack war. Your scavenged weapon holds a single charge. It provides zero tactical advantage. Hide in the vault." Bex clamped her jaw shut. She hated the feeling of uselessness. She survived the dead zones by moving, by fighting, by staying 3 steps ahead of the danger. Hiding in a concrete box felt like waiting for the executioner. Owen did not wait for her agreement. He stepped out of the room. "Lock the wheel," he ordered one last time. He turned and sprinted down the long hallway, vanishing into the crimson shadows. Beck stood alone in the vault. The sound of pulse rifle fire echoed from the upper levels of the fortress. The war raged above her head. She set Gus down on the metal table. The possum curled into a tight ball, wrapping his hairless tail around his nose to block out the chaos. Bex walked to the heavy iron door. She grabbed the wheel handle and pulled it shut. The locking mechanism engaged with a heavy, final clank. She stood in the dark, starting at the bare walls. A deep rumble shook the floor. Dust drifted from the cracked ceiling. "He fights to protect my cargo," Bex thought, the guilt hitting her like a punch to the gut. "I brought this war to his people." Bex paced the small room for 2 minutes. Every second felt like an hour. She checked the blaster. She adjusted the bag. The silence in the vault gnawed at her nerves. The distant sound of combat fueled her anxiety. She refused to cower while the Lycan King took the hits. She shoved the blaster into her pocket. She grabbed her bag and slung the strap across her chest. She picked Gus up and unzipped her jacket, tucking the fat animal inside against her ribs. She zipped the coat halfway up, creating a makeshift pouch. Gus let out a disgruntled squeak but settled against her body heat. Bex reached down and pulled the bypass wrench from her right boot. The solid steel tool caught the dim red light. She approached the electronic keypad beside the heavy iron door. The internal lock required a code to open from the inside. Bex jammed the flat edge of the wrench into the plastic seam of the keypad casing. She applied pressure. The casing snapped off, revealing the internal circuit board. Bex found the primary power wire and the manual override relay. She wedged the steel tip of the tool between the two contacts, creating a forced bridge. Sparks showered her hand, stinging her skin. The heavy iron door groaned. The locking mechanism disengaged with a loud clack. Bex pulled the wheel handle. The door swung open. She stepped out into the hallway. The sirens continued their relentless scream. A haze of burning wire and scorched concrete hung in the air. Bex moved with silent precision. She crept up the steel stairs, leaving the underground garage behind. She reached the ground floor of the fortress. The heavy barricade doors stood blown off their hinges. A giant crater marred the center of the entrance hall. She stepped through the ruined doorway and out into the pack streets. The city burned. Chapter 16. The pack streets resembled a war zone. Concrete debris littered the asphalt. Laser fire sliced through the dark sky, casting harsh red shadows against the sturdy buildings. The rebel strike team pushed hard toward the safe house, armed with heavy energy shields and pulse rifles. Bex ducked behind the twisted wreckage of a civilian transport cart. She kept her hand pressed against her jacket, ensuring Gus stayed secure in his makeshift pouch. The possum trembled against her ribs. She peered over the jagged metal. Owen fought in the center of the intersection. He remained in his human form, a brutal force of nature. He moved with terrifying speed, dodging energy bolts with inches to spare. He dropped the broken metal case on the ground behind him, using his body as a shield to protect the Wolfsbane cargo. A rebel soldier charged him with an electrified baton. Owen caught the man's wrist, snapped the bone with a sickening crack, and hurled the soldier into a brick wall. The feral king fought with bare hands against armed men, his fast healing sealing the minor grazing burns from the laser fire. "He fights like a demon," Bex observed, her grip tightening on the blaster in her hand. Wyatt and a squad of enforcers arrived from the flank. The pack wolves tore into the rebel lines, creating a chaotic brawl of teeth, claws, and pulse fire. The raw heat radiating from the shifting wolves created a distorted haze in the cold night air. Bex scanned the battlefield. She searched for the rebel commander. Her eyes locked onto a figure standing on the fire escape of a nearby building. A sniper. The rebel wore black tactical gear, blending into the shadows. He raised a long-barreled energy rifle. He ignored the enforcers. He ignored Wyatt. He aimed his weapon right at the Lycan King. Owen wrestled a heavy pulse cannon out of an attacker's grip. He turned his back to the fire escape, exposing his blind spot. The sniper's finger tightened on the trigger. The red laser sight painted a deadly dot right between Owen's shoulder blades. The king remained blind to the lethal threat aimed at his spine. Bex did not hesitate. She vaulted over the wrecked transport cart. Her combat boots hit the broken asphalt. She sprinted across the open street, dodging stray laser fire. She raised her scavenged weapon, lining up the sights with the shadow on the fire escape. Bex fired. The blaster kicked hard against her palm. A single, blinding bolt of blue energy shot from the scratched metal barrel. The blast struck the fire escape structure right below the sniper's boots. The rusted iron shattered. The rebel soldier let out a scream as the platform gave way. He plummeted into the alley below, his rifle discharging a harmless shot into the sky. Bex dropped the empty weapon to her side. The energy cell was dead. Owen whipped his head around at the sound of the blast. His amber eyes locked onto Bex standing in the open street. Shock registered on his face, followed a second later by pure, feral panic. "Behind you!" Owen roared. Bex spun around. She moved too slow. The rebel leader stepped out from the smoke of a nearby explosion. He wore heavy armor, his face hidden behind a scarred visor. He swung the heavy stock of his pulse rifle in a brutal arc. The metal struck the side of Bex's head with bone-crushing force. A flash of white light blinded her. Pain exploded behind her eyes. Her knees buckled under her own weight. The chaotic noise of the battlefield faded into a muted, distant ringing. She hit the asphalt hard. Gus let out a muffled squeak inside her jacket. The rebel leader reached down, his armored hand grabbing the collar of her coat. He hauled her limp body off the ground. Darkness swallowed the edges of her vision. The last thing Bex saw was the Lycan King tearing through the enemy lines to reach her, his roar of fury shaking the broken city streets. Then, the world went black. Chapter 17. A brutal throb behind her eyes pulled Bex from the darkness. Her head pounded a vicious rhythm against her skull. She tried to lift her hands to rub her temples. Cold, thick copper wire bit deep into her wrists. She sat bound to a heavy steel chair. The harsh metal edges dug into her spine. She blinked against the blinding glare of an overhead halogen light. The right side of her face burned with a dull ache. The stiff scab on her cheek pulled tight, cracking under the strain of her grimace. She took a slow, measured breath. Her ribs ached from the fall. She remembered the chaotic street fight. She remembered the sniper, the warning, and the rifle stock crashing into her head. The rebels captured her. My luck ran dry on the asphalt, she thought, a bitter taste lingering in her mouth. The king let me fall. She surveyed her prison. Bare concrete walls enclosed the freezing space. Crates of stolen munitions sat stacked in the corners, casting long shadows across the floor. A steel work table occupied the center of the cold room. The rebel leader stood beside the table. He wore thick tactical armor over a gray uniform. A scarred visor rested on his forehead, revealing cold, calculating eyes. He set his pulse rifle against a wooden crate and crossed his arms over his chest. Between them, resting on the steel table, sat the broken contraband case. The smashed lock hung from the metal frame, a useless piece of scrap. The 4 glass vials rested inside the padded foam, casting a toxic purple glow across the rebel's face. Owen dropped the cargo during the brawl, a tactical error driven by his untamed rage. The Alpha chose to use his bare hands in the street fight, leaving the fragile vials exposed on the pavement. The enemy capitalized on the mistake, seizing the bomb and taking a hostage in one swift move. "You possess a thick skull for a human," the rebel leader spoke. His voice carried a rough, grating edge. "Most street runners shatter under a heavy strike." "I drink plenty of milk," Bex shot back. The words tore at her dry throat. "What do you want, Corin?" Corin stepped closer to the table. "You know my name. Good. It saves us the introductions." He pointed a gloved finger at the broken case. "Your alpha beast destroyed the primary locking interface," Corin explained. He tore the latch apart. That brute force triggered the failsafe. The detonator module locked down. If I shatter these vials right now, the gas dissipates in this room and kills my own squad. We need the disperser to aerosolize the poison over the entire pack territory. Bex stared at the purple vials. The weaponized wolfsbane looked beautiful and terrifying. Sounds like a personal problem, Bex said. She tested the wire ties binding her wrists. The copper dug deeper, drawing a fresh bead of blood. She held back a wince. Corin leaned over the table, bringing his scarred face inches from hers. "You are a tech smuggler," Corin stated. "You bypass security grids for a living. You rigged a dead engine to run on scrap. You know how to wire a bypass on a localized detonator. You will give me the arming codes, or you will rewire the module yourself." "I do not build bombs," Bex defied him. "I transport goods. I never agreed to wipe out a city." "The credits we promised you sit in a lockbox across the room." Corin offered a different tactic. He gestured toward a steel container on a shelf. "You do the job. You walk out of this warehouse a rich woman. You buy your ticket to the walled colonies. You leave the wolves to burn." He offers the one thing I crave, Bex thought. Freedom. But the price is genocide. She pictured the safe house. She pictured the protective heat of the Lycan King. "Keep your credits," Bex spat. Corin lost his patience. He grabbed a pair of heavy wire cutters from his belt. He did not aim for her restraints. He grabbed her left hand, forcing her fingers open. He positioned the steel jaws over her index finger. "You have 10 minutes to reconsider," Corin warned, "or I start removing digits. Let us see how well you hotwire a circuit board with missing fingers." He released her hand and slammed the heavy wire cutters onto the steel table. He turned toward the door. Bex exhaled a shaky breath, her eyes scanning the floor. In the far corner, hidden in the shadows, sat a stiff, gray lump. The rebels found Gus inside her coat and tossed the possum aside, assuming he was dead. Gus did not move a muscle. Chapter 18. Corin walked out of the concrete room, the heavy blast doors sealing shut behind him with a loud hiss. He left 2 armed guards behind to watch the prisoner. The men carried standard-issue energy rifles. They paced the perimeter, their boots echoing in the quiet space. Bex tugged at her restraints. The thick copper wire held firm. Blood trickled down her wrists, staining the cuffs of her jacket. She tested the bindings around her boots. The rebels secured her ankles to the steel chair legs, eliminating any chance of a sprint for the exit. "The Alpha tore through our vanguard," the taller guard muttered, leaning against a stack of munitions crates. "He ripped Jax apart with bare hands. I saw it. The king fights like a demon from the pit." "Stop talking about the beast," the scarred guard snapped. He kept his rifle raised, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We possess the poison. We possess the mechanic. We win the war tonight." Bex tuned out their conversation. She focused on the far corner of the room. The gray lump in the shadows remained still for another minute. Then, a single cross-eyed gaze opened. Gus the possum surveyed the warehouse. The drop in his body temperature fooled the rebels, keeping him safe from a boot to the ribs. The animal hated stress. He hated noise. He wanted a dark, quiet place to sleep. He also wanted heat. The cold concrete floor offered zero comfort. He remembered the glorious warmth radiating from Bex's jacket during the chaos of the street battle. He decided he needed that heat back. Gus waited for the tall guard to turn his back. The possum rolled onto his belly. He executed a silent, awkward waddle across the floor, freezing into a rigid statue the second the scarred guard shifted his stance. The guard's gaze swept right past the gray animal, dismissing the shape as a pile of dirty rags. Gus resumed his mission. He reached the steel chair. Bex watched in silent disbelief. She kept her face forward, maintaining a glare of defiance to draw the guard's attention away from her boots. The little trash rat is a covert operative, Bex thought, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Gus climbed the leg of the chair, his sharp claws gripping her denim pants. He reached her lap. He sniffed her hands, bound tight behind her back. He located the copper wire. The possum possessed teeth designed by nature to crack thick shells and chew through bone. Copper wire presented a minor obstacle. Gus opened his jaws and bit down on the bindings. Bex bit the inside of her cheek to mask her reaction. The possum's sharp teeth grazed her skin, but the pressure on the wire increased. She coughed, forcing a loud hack to cover the sound of grinding metal. "The commander better return soon," the tall guard complained, pacing near the broken case. "The purple glow from those vials makes my skin crawl. It looks like bad magic." "It is science," the scarred guard corrected him. "Lethal science. It chokes the air from their lungs." Behind Bex's back, a distinct snap echoed in the quiet space. The thick copper gave way. Gus chewed through the primary loop, loosening the tension holding her wrists together. Bex slid her hands free, ignoring the stinging pain in her skin. She kept her arms behind her back, hiding her newfound freedom. Gus let out a satisfied squeak and curled into a ball on the seat behind her, pressing against her lower back to steal her body heat. Bex flexed her fingers. She lacked a weapon. Her blaster laid empty on the asphalt miles away. The rebels confiscated her bag. She needed an advantage before Corin returned with the wire cutters. She analyzed the room. The guards stood 10 feet apart. The broken metal case sat on the table. The heavy blast doors remained locked. She formulated a desperate plan. She needed to strike the taller guard first, take his energy rifle, and use the steel chair as a shield. Before she made her move, a loud, thunderous boom shook the corrugated metal roof above their heads. The guards jumped, raising their rifles toward the ceiling. Dust rained down on the steel table. The warehouse trembled under the weight of a sudden, heavy impact. "He found me," Bex thought, a fierce grin breaking across her face. Chapter 19. Owen stood in the center of the ruined pack street, surrounded by the aftermath of the ambush. Concrete debris and shattered glass littered the asphalt. Enforcers secured the perimeter, dragging wounded rebel soldiers into custody. The blaring emergency sirens finally fell silent, leaving a ringing echo in the cold night air. Wyatt approached his king. The beta carried a scorch mark across his shoulder armor, but he ignored the damage. He stopped a few feet away, assessing the scene. "The strike team is broken," Wyatt reported. "We secured the borders, but the human is gone, and the cargo vanished with her." Owen clenched his fists. The fresh pink skin on his healing palms stretched tight. The silver burn on his chest throbbed a relentless rhythm of pain. He failed. The feral beast in his mind demanded violence, pushing him to abandon strategy and fight the enemy head-on. That untamed rage blinded him to the true objective. He dropped the broken metal case on the ground to use his hands in combat. He left the fragile glass vials of weaponized poison exposed. The rebel leader exploited the tactical error, stealing the bomb and taking Bex as a hostage. "Gather the defenders," Owen ordered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Lock down the inner city. I am hunting." "You do not know their location," Wyatt argued. "The city spans miles of industrial ruins. They possess a transport vehicle. They could hide anywhere." Owen did not argue. He closed his eyes. He tuned out the chatter of the enforcers. He filtered out the crackle of burning wreckage and the howl of the winter wind. He pushed his super senses past their normal limits, casting a wide auditory net over the sprawling city. He searched for a specific mechanical hum. He remembered the heavy, grinding sound of the rebel transport engine as it fled the battle zone. Above all, he searched for a heartbeat. He knew the frantic, stubborn rhythm of Bex's pulse. A minute passed, then 2. Owen opened his eyes. The amber glow pierced the shadows. He locked onto a faint, distant vibration echoing from the northern industrial sector. He broke into a sprint. The Lycan King moved with terrifying speed. He left the pack borders behind, diving back into the dead zones. He ignored the roads, opting for a direct, vertical path. He leapt onto the fire escape of a crumbling apartment building, his combat boots denting the rusted iron. He vaulted over the edge, landing on the flat rooftop. He ran across the skyline. He cleared 10-foot gaps between structures in single bounds. The physical exertion fueled his internal furnace. The heat rolled off his skin, turning the freezing air around him into a faint mist. The silver wound on his chest screamed in agony with every massive jump, but the pain sharpened his focus. I left the cargo vulnerable, Owen thought, his boots slamming against a gravel roof. I left her unguarded. I will tear their fortress to the ground. He tracked the auditory breadcrumbs. The hum of the transport engine died out, replaced by the muffled voices of rebel soldiers giving orders inside a concrete structure. He heard the distinctive click of heavy blast doors sealing shut. Owen reached the edge of the industrial sector. A sprawling, flat-roofed warehouse sat isolated in the center of a barren lot. Armed patrols circled the perimeter, their pulse rifles drawn. Owen bypassed the ground troops. He climbed a nearby communication tower, ascending the steel lattice with brutal efficiency. He reached the top and calculated the distance to the warehouse roof. He heard Corin's voice echoing through the corrugated metal below. He heard the threat of wire cutters. He heard the promise of removed digits. The feral beast roared in his mind, demanding a slaughter. This time, Owen did not fight the urge. He let the rage take the wheel. He launched himself from the tower. He fell through the dark sky like a meteor, aiming dead center for the warehouse roof. Chapter 20. The corrugated metal roof buckled under the impact. Steel beams snapped. The ceiling shattered in a violent explosion of shrapnel and dust. Owen crashed into the warehouse, landing square on the metal work table. The heavy steel legs collapsed under his weight, sending the broken contraband case sliding across the floor. He stood up from the wreckage, a towering silhouette of muscle and fury in the dim halogen light. The two rebel guards stood frozen in shock. They stared at the Lycan King, unable to process the sheer violence of his entrance. Owen did not grant them a moment to recover. He dropped from the crushed table and lunged at the taller guard. He swatted the energy rifle out of the man's hands, sending the weapon clattering across the concrete. Owen grabbed the guard by the tactical vest and hurled him through the air. The rebel crashed into a stack of heavy wooden crates, splintering the boxes into pieces before slumping to the floor unconscious. The scarred guard raised his weapon, his hands shaking. He pulled the trigger. A red energy bolt grazed Owen's shoulder, singeing the Kevlar vest. Bex made her move. She leapt from the steel chair, ignoring the wire still binding her boots. She hopped forward, grabbed the heavy wire cutters Corin left on the floor, and swung the steel tool hard. She struck the scarred guard right behind the knee. The joint buckled. Owen closed the distance in a blur. He delivered a brutal backhand strike to the guard's helmet, knocking him out cold. The warehouse fell quiet, save for the hum of the overhead lights and the rattle of falling dust. Owen turned to Bex. His amber eyes flared bright, the feral beast raging against its cage. He took a step toward her. "I possess the wire cutters," Bex warned, holding the tool up in a defensive posture. "Do not give me a reason to use them on a king." The threat broke his feral trance. The amber glow faded, leaving a solid, focused gaze. He reached down and grabbed the thick copper wire binding her boots. He snapped the metal with bare hands, freeing her legs. "Grab the rat," Owen ordered, keeping his voice low. Bex reached onto the chair and scooped Gus into her hands. The possum let out a disgruntled squeak, but allowed her to tuck him back into her jacket. Owen walked over to the broken case. He picked it up, ensuring the 4 glass vials of purple wolfsbane remained intact inside the padded foam. He tucked the box tight under his left arm. "We use the blast doors," Owen said, gesturing toward the heavy iron exit. Before they took a step, the locking mechanism on the blast doors engaged with a loud clack. The heavy iron panels slid open. Corin stepped into the room. A squad of 6 rebel soldiers filed in behind him, raising their pulse rifles at the king and the smuggler. Corin did not hold a weapon. He held a small black device lined with exposed wires and a digital display. "You broke my table," Corin noted, his scarred face twisting into a cruel smile. And you injured my men, but your timing is flawless. You saved me the trouble of hunting you down." Corin revealed the device in his hand. It was a secondary digital detonator. He bypassed the broken lock module using his own tech. He did not need Bex's arming codes anymore. He slammed the device onto the side of the broken case tucked under Owen's arm. A magnetic clamp locked the detonator to the metal frame. Corin hit a switch. The device chirped. A digital timer lit up on the display. Bright red numbers flashed in the dim room. 3 minutes and 0 seconds. The numbers began to count down. A high-pitched mechanical whine echoed from the case. The aerosol disperser charged up, ready to shatter the glass vials and flood the room with lethal poison. Corin laughed, backing out of the warehouse. He hit the external control panel. The heavy blast doors slammed shut, sealing Owen and Bex inside the concrete tomb. The lock engaged, dropping a heavy magnetic seal over the exit. They stood trapped in the quiet room. The red numbers ticked away, casting a bloody glow across the concrete floor. 2 minutes and 50 seconds remained. Chapter 21. The red numbers on the digital detonator flashed a brutal countdown. 2 minutes and 45 seconds remained. The high-pitched mechanical whine of the disperser grew louder, charging the system to shatter the fragile glass vials. Owen tilted his head back, his amber eyes locking onto the shattered ceiling. He bent his knees, muscles coiling tight beneath his shredded clothes. "I jump," the Lycan King stated. He grabbed Bex by the shoulder. "I carry you out the roof." Before he leaped, a hidden speaker mounted in the corner of the warehouse crackled to life. Corin's rough voice echoed through the concrete space. "I anticipate the obvious moves, Alpha," the rebel leader mocked. A loud hum vibrated through the steel beams above. A grid of blinding blue energy ignited across the gaping hole in the roof. The containment field hissed as stray dust particles drifted into the plasma web and vaporized on contact. The escape route vanished, replaced by a lethal snare. Bex stared at the sizzling energy shield. The reality of the trap settled over her. They sat locked inside a concrete box with a live bomb. Her head throbbed a vicious rhythm against her skull from the rifle strike. The fresh cuts on her wrists stung, the blood drying into tight, itchy lines. She pushed the pain aside. Survival demanded focus. "Give me the cargo," Bex demanded. Owen hesitated. The feral beast in his mind hated handing a weapon over, but the king recognized the limits of his own brute strength. He possessed claws and teeth. He lacked the delicate touch required to stop a digital timer. He lowered his arm and set the broken metal case on the concrete floor. Bex dropped to her knees beside the box. She still gripped the heavy wire cutters. "My brain feels split in two," Bex thought, fighting a wave of nausea. "I need to trace the circuit without triggering the failsafe." She jammed the sharp steel tip of the cutters into the seam of the detonator casing. The magnetic clamp held the device tight against the metal frame. She applied downward pressure, using the tool as a wedge. The plastic casing snapped apart, revealing a dense maze of raw copper, primary power cables, and a secondary logic board. The purple glow from the weaponized Wolfsbane cast a toxic light over the exposed wires. Owen paced the floor behind her. The raw heat radiating from his skin warmed the freezing warehouse. His combat boots crunched over the shattered remains of the work table. He glared at the sealed blast doors, his chest heaving with untamed rage. Gus shifted inside Bex's jacket. The possum let out a nervous squeak, feeling the tension spike in the room. "Keep quiet, Rat," Bex whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. She leaned closer to the bomb. The timer ticked down to 1 minute and 50 seconds. Bex analyzed the circuit logic. The device utilized a standard bypass trigger. If she cut the main power line, the backup battery would instantly detonate the charge. She needed to sever the communication link between the timer and the disperser module before killing the power. 3 wires connected the logic board to the firing pin: red, yellow, and black. "You build a trap with standard surplus parts, Corin," Bex muttered, her confidence returning in a small burst. She maneuvered the heavy steel jaws of the cutters into the cramped space. The tool felt clumsy and oversized for such delicate work. Her hands shook, a lingering side effect of the concussion. She gritted her teeth, forcing her muscles steady. She clamped the blades over the yellow wire. "If this goes wrong," Bex spoke over her shoulder, "the gas fills the room in 2 seconds. It burns your lungs first." "Cut the wire," Owen commanded, his gaze fixed on the locked iron doors. "We do not die in this cage." Chapter 22. The timer hit 1 minute and 30 seconds. Bex applied pressure to the steel handles. The jaws bit through the yellow insulation, snapping the copper core. She held her breath. The red numbers continued to count down, but the high-pitched mechanical whine dipped a fraction of a decibel. The fail-safe loop remained intact. "One down," Bex said, adjusting her grip on the tool. Owen stepped away from the center of the room. He walked to the heavy blast doors and pressed his ear against the cold iron. He closed his eyes. He tuned out the whine of the bomb and the hum of the plasma shield above. He focused his super senses on the exterior perimeter. He heard the distinct crunch of combat boots on gravel, hundreds of boots. He heard the click of energy rifles powering up. He heard the deep rumble of armored transport engines idling in the dark. Corin did not just lock them in a room. The rebel leader gathered his entire army outside the warehouse. They wait for the countdown, Owen realized, his voice a low growl. Corin plans to let the gas clear, then march his forces over our bones and straight into the pack borders. The Lycan King stepped back from the doors. The raw silver burn on his chest flared with fresh agony. The graze on his left shoulder armor sent a dull ache down his arm. He ignored the damage. He refused to let an army of scavengers claim his territory. He turned his gaze to Bex. She worked on the next wire, using her fingernail to strip the insulation away from a tight copper node. Her chopped hair fell in her eyes. The dirt and dried blood on her face highlighted her sheer determination. Owen made a choice. He could not defuse the bomb, but he could change the odds outside the doors. He dropped to one knee, anchoring himself to the concrete floor. He tilted his head back toward the plasma shield buzzing in the roof. He reached deep into his soul, grabbing the feral beast by the throat and pulling it forward. Owen opened his mouth and roared. It was not the commanding alpha push used to force submission. It was a true, primal howl. The sound erupted from his chest, tearing through the warehouse with bone-shaking force. The acoustic wave hit the concrete walls and amplified. The sheer volume rattled the broken case on the floor. Bex flinched, dropping her hands from the circuit board. The howl hit her eardrums like a physical blow. The sound contained raw grief, limitless fury, and a desperate summons. He calls his people to war, Bex thought, staring at the fierce king. The howl stretched on, piercing the night sky. It carried over the dead zones, over the broken industrial skyline, and reached the fortified walls of the Pack City. Owen cut the sound off, dropping his chin to his chest. He pulled ragged breaths into his lungs. The effort drained a massive chunk of his energy reserves. Silence rushed back into the room, broken only by the ticking timer. 1 minute and 10 seconds. "Did they hear you?" Bex asked, her voice tight. Owen stood up, his amber eyes burning bright. "My enforcers never ignore a summons." A distant rumble answered his claim. The vibrations started in the ground, a faint tremor traveling through the concrete foundation. Far away in the dark streets, hundreds of wolves shifted form. The pack moved as one entity, tearing out of the gates to answer their king. The rumble grew louder, turning into a thunderous cascade of movement. "You brought the fight to us," Bex noted, turning her attention back to the red and black wires. "I hope your men run fast. We lack the luxury of time." Chapter 23. 45 seconds left on the digital display. The rebel army outside the warehouse reacted to the approaching threat. Shouts of panic echoed through the iron blast doors. The whine of pulse cannons charging filled the air. Then, the pack crashed into the rebel perimeter. The impact sounded like a freight train hitting a brick wall. Explosions rocked the ground outside. The snarling of feral wolves mixed with the scream of laser fire. The battle turned into a chaotic bloodbath in seconds. Bex ignored the noise. She tuned out the war raging 10 feet away. She focused entirely on the circuit board in front of her knees. She nudged the red wire apart from the black one. A drop of sweat fell from her brow, stinging her eye, but she didn't blink. 30 seconds. A heavy pulse cannon blast struck the exterior of the blast doors. The magnetic seal overloaded, sparking in a shower of white light. The thick iron panels groaned, buckled inward, and ripped wide open. Smoke poured into the warehouse. The freezing winter wind chased the debris. Rebel soldiers flooded through the broken doorway, pushed back by the relentless assault of the pack enforcers. Wyatt led the charge, his pulse rifle discarded in favor of bare claws and lethal teeth. The beta tore through a rebel guard, clearing a path for his king. Owen did not join the offensive push. He stepped right in front of Bex, planting his combat boots wide. He became a living shield between the human smuggler and the war zone. A rebel soldier rushed the gap, aiming an electrified baton at Bex's head. Owen caught the man by the throat. With a brutal twist of his hips, he hurled the soldier across the room. The rebel crashed into the remaining wooden crates and did not get back up. "Focus on the machine!" Owen yelled over his shoulder, swatting a stray energy bolt out of the air with his bare hand. 20 seconds. Bex clamped the wire cutters over the red cord. Her logic told her the red wire carried the detonator signal. The black wire held the failsafe power. If she cut the wrong one, the room filled with poison. Trust your gut, Bex thought. You survive by trusting the grit. 10 seconds. The fighting escalated. An enforcer threw a rebel sniper across the floor. The man slid across the concrete, stopping inches from Bex's boots. She didn't flinch. She kept her eyes glued to the red wire. 5 seconds. She squeezed the steel handles. The jaws sliced through the red insulation. 4 seconds. The wire snapped. 3 seconds. The digital display flickered. 2 seconds. The red numbers vanished. The screen went dark. The high-pitched mechanical whine of the disperser died out, leaving a hollow silence from the metal case. The purple glass vials remained intact inside the padded foam. Bex let out a ragged breath, her shoulders slumping forward. She dropped the heavy wire cutters onto the concrete. "Bomb is dead," Bex announced, her voice cracking from the dry air. Owen heard her. He delivered a final, devastating blow to a rebel attacker, dropping the man to the floor. The Lycan King turned around, his chest heaving. The amber fire in his eyes dimmed as the immediate threat vanished. The pack secured the warehouse, pinning the remaining rebel forces to the ground. Wyatt stood near the broken doors, issuing rapid orders to his squad. The war was over. The cargo was safe. Chapter 24. The adrenaline left Bex's system in a rush, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. Her hands shook. She leaned back, resting her spine against the cold concrete floor. Gus popped his head out of her jacket collar, his pink nose twitching at the drifting smoke and ash. The possum let out a quiet squeak of approval. "We lived," Bex told the animal, fighting a tired grin. Across the room, Owen stood amidst the fallen debris. The feral heat radiating from his skin began to fade. He took a deep breath, scanning his victorious enforcers. Without warning, his knees buckled. The Lycan King hit the floor hard. He caught himself on one arm, a harsh groan tearing from his throat. Black blood pooled on the side of his shredded shirt, dripping down the heavy Kevlar vest. Bex shoved the broken contraband case aside and scrambled to her feet. She rushed across the room, sliding onto her knees next to him. "Owen!" Bex called out. He gripped his side, his face pale under the grime. "Snipers! They switched ammo during the breach." Bex examined the wound. The entry hole looked ragged. A normal pulse blast left a cauterized burn. This wound bled thick and dark. Silver bullets, Bex realized, her stomach twisting. The rebel strike team brought specialized rounds for the final assault. The silver burned him from the inside. The toxic metal disrupted his fast healing. As long as the slug remained embedded in his flesh, the wound would continue to poison his blood and tear his tissue apart. Bex didn't hesitate. She grabbed the edge of his shredded dark shirt and ripped the fabric wider, exposing the bleeding wound just below his ribs. "I need to dig it out," Bex said, her voice steady. Owen nodded, clenching his jaw tight. Bex possessed 0 medical supplies. She grabbed the heavy wire cutters from the floor. The steel jaws lacked sanitation, but she had 0 time to worry about infection. The silver acted faster than dirt. "Hold still," Bex instructed. She pressed her left hand flat against his stomach to brace him. With her right hand, she guided the sharp tip of the wire cutters into the bullet wound. Owen let out a feral growl of pure agony. His muscles locked rigid. His fingers dug deep into the concrete floor, cracking the stone under his grip. He fought the instinct to push her away. Bex gritted her teeth, ignoring his pain. She dug deeper, feeling the steel jaws scrape against a hard object lodged near his rib bone. She clamped the cutters tight. "Got it!" Bex grunted. She pulled her hand back in a swift, violent motion. The crushed, bloody silver slug popped out of the wound, clattering across the floor. Almost instantly, the black tint in Owen's blood faded to a bright, healthy red. The ragged edges of the flesh began to knit together, the fast healing taking over now that the toxic metal vanished from his system. Bex dropped the bloody tool. She tore a clean strip of fabric from the hem of her jacket and pressed it hard against his side, applying pressure while the wound sealed itself. Owen let his head fall back, his breathing returning to a steady rhythm. The pain subsided, replaced by the familiar burn of the healing process. He opened his eyes, the deep amber color meeting her gaze. "You make a brutal medic, human," Owen rasped. "You make a terrible patient, King," Bex shot back, keeping her hands pressed to his side. The chaos of the warehouse faded into the background. Wyatt shouted orders by the doors, but the noise felt miles away. The tension between the smuggler and the alpha shifted, replacing the adrenaline with a quiet, grounded reality. Chapter 25. The underground garage felt colder than the dead zones. Bex walked over to a rusted utility sink in the corner. She turned the metal tap. Freezing water sputtered from the pipe. She thrust her hands under the stream, scrubbing the Lycan King's blood from her skin. The water turned a pale pink, swirling down the drain. She dried her hands on her denim pants. Pain pulsed a vicious rhythm behind her eyes, a parting gift from Corin's rifle stock. The stiff scab on her cheek pulled tight every time she blinked. The fresh cuts on her wrists burned, the drying blood pulling the skin taut. Footsteps echoed across the concrete. Wyatt emerged from the stairwell. The beta carried a familiar canvas strap in his left hand and a heavy steel container in his right. He reached the vehicle and tossed the items onto the dented hood. The metal clanged. "My enforcers swept the rebel transport," Wyatt grunted, crossing his arms over his chest. "They located your confiscated gear. They also cracked the commander's mobile safe." Bex stared at the recovered bag. She reached out, her fingers brushing the rough canvas. Beside the bag sat the steel lockbox. "The Alpha commanded a fair trade," Wyatt continued, his voice tight with lingering distrust. "You brought war to our doorstep, human. You bled for our pack. The old laws demand we honor the debt. The box holds enough looted credits to drain a decade of wages from a top-tier enforcer. It buys a permanent visa to the safe colonies." Bex popped the latch on the box. Neat rows of glowing data chips lined the interior. Pure wealth, total freedom. "Take the prize and drive," Wyatt ordered. He turned his back and marched toward the exit, leaving the garage to the smuggler and the king. Owen stepped out of the shadows. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, his body paying the toll of the street brawl. The silver bullet wound on his side closed into a jagged scar. The raw burn on his chest throbbed beneath the heavy Kevlar vest and shredded fabric. His singed shoulder armor scraped against the concrete pillar as he leaned his weight against the wall. Bex grabbed the lockbox and shoved it into her bag. She pulled the zipper shut. "You secured the payload," Owen stated, his voice a low rumble in the quiet space. "I did," Bex agreed. She tapped her fingers against the vehicle's rusty grille. Gus the possum wiggled inside her coat. He climbed out of the collar, plopped onto the metal hood, and let out a tired squeak. Bex scooped the fat animal up and placed him on the passenger seat inside the cab. She grabbed a spare length of heavy wire from the floorboard and tied the broken passenger door shut, anchoring it to the interior roll bar so it wouldn't fly open on the road. Owen watched her every move. His amber eyes burned with an unspoken weight. The feral beast inside his mind clawed at the cage, demanding he step forward, take the human, and lock the gates. He fought the urge. He refused to turn into a monster. He maintained his grip on his own instincts. "The road east runs clear," Owen said. "My border patrols routed the remaining rebel stragglers. You possess a safe window to cross the wasteland." Bex gripped the strap of her bag. The tension between them hummed louder than the broken bomb disperser. She stepped away from the hood, closing the distance between them. She stopped inches from his combat boots. "You could tell me to stay," Bex challenged, tilting her head back to meet his gaze. Owen set his jaw. The heat rolling off his skin washed over her freezing face. "I command wolves. I force their submission. I will not use the heavy vibe on a human. You earned your freedom. You survived the worst of my world." Bex searched his face. She saw the exhaustion, the raw power, and the fierce protection he offered without hesitation. She threw her bag onto the driver's seat. "Goodbye, Owen," Bex said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She climbed into the cab. She grabbed the exposed ignition wires and struck them together. The salvaged coolant tube held firm. The engine roared to life, filling the garage with black exhaust. Owen stood frozen near the concrete pillar. He watched the machine reverse, the patched tires spinning on the pavement. He did not blink as the vehicle rolled up the ramp and disappeared into the night. Chapter 26. Bex steered the hot-wired machine through the fortified city streets. The pack citizens worked through the dark hours, clearing concrete debris and extinguishing small fires from the rebel assault. Enforcers patrolled the intersections, their eyes glowing faint yellow in the shadows. They watched the human drive past, parting ways to grant her a clear path. She navigated around a giant crater near the square, the damage from a stray pulse cannon blast. The destruction mirrored the ache in her own skull. She reached the main gate. The steel beam barricade stood closed. 4 border guards manned the post. The lead guard recognized the dented grille of her vehicle. He did not raise his pulse rifle. He marched to the control panel and slammed his fist onto the heavy button. The steel beams groaned, pulling apart to reveal the vast, empty expanse of the dead zones. Bex rolled forward, stopping the vehicle right at the threshold. The freezing winter wind howled through the open gate, carrying the chill of rust and decay. The ruined skyscrapers loomed in the distance like rotting teeth. Beyond those ruins sat the walled colonies. Civilization, warm beds, predictable days. Bex gripped the steering wheel tight. Her knuckles turned white under the strain. She stared into the dark abyss of the wasteland. A bitter knot formed in her throat. She thought about the safe colonies. She thought about the quiet life bought with a box of looted data chips. The vision offered zero appeal. It lacked the spark of danger. It lacked the electric friction of the underground vault. It lacked a feral king. On the dashboard, Gus the possum let out a loud yawn. He stretched his short legs, circled twice, and curled into a fat gray ball right over the heater vent. He closed his cross-eyed gaze and went to sleep. "You possess the right idea, Gus," Bex muttered to the sleeping animal. She slammed her foot on the brake pedal. The machine screeched to a halt, hovering half an inch outside the pack borders. Bex threw the gear shift into reverse. She stomped the gas. The vehicle lurched backward into the city. She spun the steering wheel hard, whipping the heavy chassis around in a tight arc. The patched tires squealed against the asphalt, kicking up a cloud of dust. The lead border guard stared in shock as the human smuggler sped back into the heart of the territory. Bex did not slow down. She tore through the streets, ignoring the speed limits and the bewildered looks of the citizens. The adrenaline rushed back into her veins, wiping away the fatigue and the throbbing pain of her concussion. She knew what she wanted. She reached the brutalist fortress in minutes. She bypassed the underground garage, throwing the vehicle into park right in the middle of the ruined entrance hall. The engines sputtered and died. Bex kicked her door open. She left the bag of credits on the seat. Owen stood amidst the rubble of the ground floor. He directed a squad of builders, pointing toward the blown-out barricade doors. He heard the screech of the brakes. He turned around. His amber eyes flared bright as Bex marched through the dust. He let out a low growl, a sound vibrating with warning and command. The builders dropped their tools and scattered, leaving the Alpha alone with the human. Bex closed the distance in 5 long strides. She did not stop to banter. She reached up, grabbed the heavy straps of his Kevlar tactical vest, and pulled him down to her level. "The walled colonies sound boring," Bex stated, her voice fierce and firm. Owen let out a rough, ragged breath. The feral beast in his mind broke the cage, purring with possessive triumph. He wrapped his large arms around her waist, lifting her boots off the shattered concrete. He pulled her flush against his chest, uncaring about the raw silver burn or the singed armor. He felt her heartbeat, steady and strong against his ribs. "You chose the wasteland," Owen growled, a wild grin breaking across his scarred face. "I chose the king," Bex corrected him. She pulled his face down and claimed his mouth. The kiss hit with the force of a pulse cannon, a raw collision of heat, grit, and survival. The war ended. The run stopped. The human smuggler and the Lycan Alpha stood in the ruins of the fortress, forging a new empire in the dark. Back in the abandoned vehicle, Gus snored on the dashboard, oblivious to the shifting world. The end. Wait! Don't go anywhere yet! If you thought Bex had grit for aiming a blaster at a Lycan King's heart, wait until you meet the woman in the next story on your screen. She makes Bex look like a choir girl. You have to hear this train wreck. Click the video on your screen right now. It is pure fire.